Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. What I'm about to share with you distills what most often helps my clients affect behavior change. While I describe this as what I do as a counselor, much of it should be useful in self-help that you might want to do. First, build on one's genetics and upbringing. We are learning that ever more of our behavior is affected not only by our upbringing, but by our genetics, from intelligence to behavioral flexibility, to self-control, to political leaning. So, my clients have made much more progress when we attempt to remediate only the most essential weaknesses, for example, a tendency towards sloth. Otherwise, we usually focus on developing goals and objectives that build on strengths and that skirt rather than remediate their weaknesses. For example, let's say a person tends to be angry or get angry. Sure, I'm going to encourage the person to use tactics to mitigate anger's effects. For example, when starting to feel anger, take a slow, deep breath, remember the price that anger imposes, and maybe, quote, go to the bathroom to calm down. But we usually focus on identifying work and environments and people that are less likely to trigger anger. Next part of what I attempt to do to encourage behavior change is I aim to change behavior, not attitude. It's usually easier to affect behavior change than attitude change. So, once clients have identified a desired change, I often ask them to imagine a movie in which the main character has the desired attitude and to describe the character's behavior during a day, typical day. Then I'll invite the client to, in between sessions, pretend that he or she is a person who displays that characteristic. Maybe it was calm, charismatic, aggressive, assertive, whatever, calmer. Because indeed, behavior change usually does precede attitudes change. Now, that approach is exemplified, and maybe this is surprising, in a song from a classic Broadway musical, The King and I. The words are, I won't sing because I can't sing worth a damn. I will, what the hell. I whistle a happy tune, and every single time the happiness in that tune convinces me that I'm not afraid. Make believe you're brave, and the trick will take you far. You may be as brave as you make believe you are. Okay, that's more than enough. Anyway, the first approach that I usually take when I'm directly working with a client is what I call the here and now approach. I first help the client identify the desired change. Then we break it into baby steps. If it's a discrete task we're talking about, like working on landing a job, I'll ask if the client wants to set a time to do the task. Maybe, for example, 9 a.m. Saturday, and working for 20 minutes on and 5 minutes off, 20 minutes on and 5 off, 20 more and 10 off. Then we'll decide if it helps for the client to give herself a reward for getting the task done or a punishment for not. And if so, I'll ask the client to select it. Then we'll identify blocks. I'll often ask the client if he or she thinks it would help to log feelings at that moment of truth. That moment of truth meaning when the client wants to start the task and as well when he or she gets stuck. And finally, we troubleshoot. If an attempt to change behavior fails, in other words, comes back second session and hasn't changed at all, we figure out whether the change was too difficult, whether it was the wrong change, whether the failure was a result of their tendency to procrastinate, so on. Anyway, we use that information, of course, to revise the plan. Now, as a backup to that, what I call here and now plan, I use a cognitive behavioral approach. And that usually helps the client determine if an irrational fear is impeding the behavior change. And if so, it's usually fear of failure, fear of rejection, or fear of embarrassment, and may be caused or exacerbated by some earlier trauma they suffered. My cognitive behavioral approach usually has 4 steps. The first, to identify the person's psychological barrier, I'm going to typically ask a question like, pretend you're about to do the task and you're feeling resistant. What's going through your head and your heart? 2, I'll typically ask the client, what would your wiser twin tell you to do in response to that? 3, if the, quote, wiser twin doesn't come up with something that the client feels has a good chance of working, I'll offer a suggestion and ask whether the client believes that would work. And 4th and finally, as with that here and now approach I mentioned earlier, if the client's attempt to change is inadequate, we troubleshoot. Now let's turn to the issue of support. Clients should fly solo as soon as possible. That's because whatever help a professional provides is mitigated not only by the session's cost and time, but because using a counselor is disempowering, making the client feel that he or she lacks sufficient self-efficacy. So, when I sense a client would do well on his or her own, I ask the client if she'd like another session, or to proceed solo, or with the help of a friend or loved one. If the client chooses the solo or friend option, I do reassure the client that if needed, she's welcome to schedule another appointment with me. And finally, I do discourage victimization. If a client wants to make activism about racism, sexism, elitism, homophobia, ageism, lookism, or trauma part of his or her life, fine. But if my client's goal, as it usually is to improve their work or personal life, it's rarely helpful to focus on those externalities, but rather on the baby steps to improving their life. As always, no model fits all, but do you think that the aforementioned, or a variant thereof, or even one of its components are worth a try? In any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko. I welcome your thumbs up. I accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments. And if you hit the share button below, I'm particularly happy because that enables you to share in your social media, and therefore my efforts make a bigger difference. And I'm also flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. But in any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.